Emotional exhaustion doesn't always present as a dramatic collapse or a tearful breakdown in the dark. For many of us, it wears a mask of extreme competence. It looks like rising every morning, ticking off the to-do list, responding to every notification, and maintaining a composed exterior while feeling an inexplicable hollowness within. It looks like being the reliable one. It looks like functioning at a high level. It looks, to the outside world, like you're perfectly fine. But the emotionally depleted adult isn't loud about their struggle. They aren't looking for attention. In fact, they are often the backbone of their social or professional circles, the person who keeps the wheels turning, the one who never complains, the one everyone else leans on. And ironically, that is precisely where the erosion of the self begins. This exhaustion doesn't arrive with a bang. It's a slow, silent infiltration. There is no singular moment where you suddenly realize your reserves are empty. Instead, it's a gradual decline, a slightly shorter fuse than you used to have, a fading interest in the hobbies that once sparked joy, or a pervasive heaviness upon waking that no amount of caffeine or sleep seems to lift. What makes this state so psychologically disorienting is the cognitive dissonance between your internal reality and your external performance. You may have the career, the relationships, and the achievements, yet you feel a deep-seated lethargy that rest cannot reach. This isn't a fatigue of the muscles, it is a weariness of the soul that comes from carrying too much for far too long. Psychologically, many emotionally exhausted adults share a common blueprint. They learned early in life that their feelings were things to be managed, suppressed, or negotiated away. Perhaps you grew up in a family dynamic where strength was the only currency and vulnerability was viewed as an inconvenience. You might have been the parentified child, the one who had to grow up too fast, the mediator, the listener, or the fixer. Somewhere along the line, you internalized a dangerous narrative that your worth is strictly tied to your utility. You learned to handle everything, the pressure, the disappointment, the emotional labor of those around you. And because you handled it so well, no one ever thought to ask what it was costing you. This exhaustion frequently targets the deeply empathetic, those who are hyper-attuned to the emotional shifts in a room. When you are wired to notice every change in tone or unspoken tension, the world is an incredibly loud and demanding place. Every interaction becomes a withdrawal from your emotional bank account. Eventually, the nervous system enters a state of functional freeze or numbness. This isn't because you stopped caring, it's because caring without replenishment is unsustainable. Your mind, in an act of self-preservation, turns down the volume on your emotions. Joy becomes muted, sadness feels distant, and even anger loses its edge. You aren't necessarily depressed in the clinical sense, you're simply flat. Life becomes something you are managing rather than something you are experiencing. Another hallmark of this depletion is a sudden, sharp irritability over trivialities. When your emotional buffer is gone, your nervous system remains in a state of hypervigilance. A small interruption or a minor inconvenience feels like an assault. This isn't a character flaw, it's a signal that your allostatic load, the wear and tear on the body and mind, has reached its limit. Many adults feel intense guilt over this irritability, comparing their internal struggles to the perceived ease of others. But you are comparing your hidden heavy lift to someone else's highlight reel. You are carrying invisible weights that others cannot see.
Often, this exhaustion is compounded by unexpressed emotions that have been intellectualized rather than felt. You've become an expert at explaining your pain instead of releasing it. You analyze your stress, you categorize your trauma, and you rationalize your burnout, but you don't actually allow the emotion to move through your body. This creates a profound disconnection from the self. You know what you should feel, but the actual sensation is like a song you can't quite remember the lyrics to. This affects your relationships too. People you love start to feel like tasks. Conversations feel like chores. You find yourself craving a solitude that isn't about being alone, but about not being needed. There is a quiet, unacknowledged grief in this state, a mourning for the version of yourself who used to feel light. You miss the version of you who had genuine excitement and effortless connection. This grief is hard to pin down because it isn't tied to a single loss. It's the result of 1,000 small sacrifices of your own needs. You become so defined by what you do for others that when your energy wanes, you face an identity crisis. You feel useless because you've confused your human value with your human output. You tell yourself things will be better after this project or after this season, but the horizon of rest keeps moving. This exhaustion doesn't arrive with a bang. It's a slow, silent infiltration. There is no singular moment where you suddenly realize your reserves are empty. Instead, it's a gradual decline, a slightly shorter fuse than you used to have, a fading interest in the hobbies that once sparked joy, or a pervasive heaviness upon waking that no amount of caffeine or sleep seems to lift. What makes this state so psychologically disorienting is the cognitive dissonance between your internal reality and your external performance. At its core, emotional exhaustion is a desperate message from your psyche. It's an honest reckoning with the fact that being strong does not mean being limitless. Strength without recovery is just slow-motion self-destruction. The first step toward reclamation isn't a vacation or a spa day. It's the radical act of noticing. It's acknowledging the fatigue beneath your productivity and the sadness beneath your smile. It's about creating emotional safety, a space where you can be imperfect without shame and where rest is a right, not a reward you have to earn. Healing requires you to learn the difference between responsibility and over-responsibility. You cannot regulate the entire world and still have a home within yourself. Letting go of the emotional burdens that aren't yours to carry will feel like selfishness at first, but that is simply the sound of your old conditioning being challenged. It's time to stop overriding your own hunger, your own fatigue, and your own boundaries. Reconnecting with yourself is the only way out. It's a slow process of coming home to your own body, listening to its signals, and finally giving yourself the same grace you have so freely given to everyone else.